Hello, my name is Rhea and I'm from Slugs in the Kitchen. Today we have a really fun recipe for the Harvest Festival. This is apple cider donuts. The apple cider is actually freshly pressed from the apples from the Cafsis farm at UCSC, so that's very exciting. To get started, we're going to first pour in 4 cups of the cider into a pot and bring that to a boil. Once it gets to a boil, we want to reduce it down to a simmer and let it simmer for about 30 minutes. Once it gets to around 1 cup into a thick syrupy consistency, then we can turn off the heat and set it aside until it cools down. Throughout this 30-minute process, I like to whisk it a little bit so it doesn't burn at the bottom of the pot and just to keep it moving. Okay, so now I'm making sure that we have exactly 1 cup into the bowl, not too much so we don't have too much liquid for this recipe. So I'm just pouring that amount into 1 cup and pouring it into a separate metal bowl and setting that aside. Alright, so for the next step we have to put the butter, or in this case, since I'm doing a vegan version of the apple cider donuts, some coconut oil. So we're doing 4 tablespoons into the bowl. Yeah, so if you want this to be vegan, you can use vegan butter. I didn't have vegan butter on hand, so I used coconut oil, which is perfectly fine. You might end up needing to do more flour at the end, but that's also fine. They will turn out okay. And then we're just gonna whisk this together with the boiled down apple cider. Alright, so now we're gonna move on to our next step of the recipe, and that is to grab a separate bowl, and to this we're gonna add half a cup of water, and then get the flour out of your vacuum sealed bag, open it up with some scissors, and pour half a cup of the flour into a measuring cup, and then put that into the bowl with the water. Now grab your yeast. The recipe, it says 7 grams. That also kind of equates to a teaspoon and a half, so that's what I'm doing right here in the video. So we're going to also add that to the bowl, and once we add it to the bowl, now we're just going to slowly whisk it together. So we just want to whisk it until it gets to a nice thick consistency, and then once we get to that really good consistency and all the clumps of the flour are mixed out, then we're going to wet a towel, make it super damp, and cover our bowl with it. Since this is our first proof, we need to let it sit for about 30 minutes. And once that 30 minutes is up, then we can come back and do the next step. Alright, so 30 minutes have passed, and now I'm going back to the bowl, taking off our wet towel. And the first thing we want to add to our bowl, or just that, the order really doesn't really matter, but the first thing I'm adding is some cinnamon, and then I'm going to add some salt, and then we're also going to add some nutmeg. And then I like to, instead of using eggs, since I am vegan, and for those who want a egg substitute, I'm going to be using applesauce. And applesauce is really great for an egg substitute. If you don't have applesauce, you can also make a chia seed or flax egg. I've also used banana, like mashed banana. But since we're making a more fall recipe, I felt like applesauce really complemented it and was a perfect substitute. And so for the applesauce, you only actually need a 1/4 cup of applesauce, not too much. We don't really want it to be very watery, and we're only substituting for 1 egg. Okay, lastly here I'm adding the cider slowly to the batter and whisking it in, and really trying to incorporate that before we add the flour. But yeah, so once we have that set and ready, now we can add 2 cups of flour. Alright, so once you have that flour added to your bowl, we're going to use either a stand-up mixer or a rubber spatula, or a rubber whisk, which is what I'm using. And we want to just really whisk that until it forms a thick batter. And then we're going to actually add the remaining flour once we incorporate that well enough. The dough will start out quite sticky, but once we knead the dough on around 5 minutes, then it will get less sticky. And of course, sometimes everyone's recipes are gonna alter, so I here even had to add some extra flour, and that could also be because I use substitutes, and that's okay. Just make sure you do the extra flour in this time before moving on to the next step. So once you get to that consistency of a non-sticky dough, we're going to put it out of the bowl and put it onto a surface, and we're going to knead it for around 5 minutes. And yeah, put a lot of force into the kneading. So once you're done with kneading your dough, we're going to lightly oil a bowl and then place our dough into the bowl. And make sure you just coat it, flip it around, make sure that the dough is oiled up, and let it rest for around 60 to 90 minutes. Alright, so we're almost done, just on to our last proof. So without kneading the dough, we're going to roll out the dough to 1/2 inch with a rolling pin. You can also use an empty wine bottle, olive oil bottle, anything that works. And then we're going to also just make sure our surface is floured, otherwise this can go badly wrong. So if you don't have a cutter, a 4-inch cutter for the donuts, I just used a applesauce lid even. Do whatever you have on hand. It's really not that hard to find something that's circular. So yeah, so we're gonna cut out the circles in our dough once it's completely rolled out. And for the middle piece, to make the donut hole, I actually used a wine bottle cork. You can use something else if you don't have that on hand. That was just what I had laying around my house. It's really up to you. You can get really creative with this. But yeah, so I ended up making, I think like 10 or so donuts, just because I added extra flour, so it ended up making a lot. And I'm just showing you a little demo of how to do that. So really press hard with your lid. Make sure it has a little bit of a sharp edge to it when you're pressing down to really cut out that circular hole. And then once you take it out, poke it with your cork. Yeah, so then I'm gonna end up placing these on a lightly sprayed, oiled, however you want to say it, baking sheet on a baking pan. And once I cover up my pans of the donut batter or donut holes, then we're just using plastic to really nicely cover these so they can rest for around 60 minutes. And if you want something to hold down your plastic so it doesn't stick to the actual donuts, you can use some cans and like hold them down over the plastic to make it stretch over it very nicely. Okay, so the step that we've been waiting for, I have already brought my oil, the rice bran oil that you got in your kit, to a boil, and I'm now doing a tester run by placing one of my donut holes into the oil and then frying it on each side, coating it with the sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg mix, and then putting it onto a drying rack. Once you get that down and you make sure your oil is at the right temperature, then you can kind of get it on a roll and start doing it for the rest of them. And I think they end up frying better the more you do it, just because the oil gets hotter and your rhythm of it gets better. Alright, so here's our final product of our donut holes. They're really yummy. They look great. I definitely am excited for you guys to give this a try. And please let us know what you think. And thank you.